Hi, welcome to our training on meeting with your MPPs, members of provincial parliament. I'm Lily Camacho, and I'm joined by Jess Carpinoni. We're staff at the Better Way Alliance. In this training, we will cover what you can expect at a meeting with an MPP, how you can feel confident going in, and some techniques to deal with tense conversations should they arise. You don't need to take notes. We've put a lot of the important stuff in a PDF that you can access alongside this video training. There are prompts in the PDF that will help you prepare. We'll go through them all with examples here in this video training. By the end of this training, we hope that you'll feel comfortable using your own voice in these kinds of meetings. Let's get right to it.
So part one is about what happens at a meeting. So what does attending a meeting with your MPP at Lobby Day actually mean? So in a closed door meeting, we can have a bit of a different approach than, let's say, a rally or another public engagement. We come from an honest point of view and ask how we can move towards each other. Rather than taking a hardline approach that might be appropriate in a public debate, in a closed door meeting, we're trying to find ways that we can both win, or how we can move closer together as two different sides. We're trying to find a realistic way that the change that we want to achieve can move forward. Think of this opportunity also as an information gathering mission. It's a chance for us to understand what the MPP or political party's true views are on a topic and who else might be making demands from them. So for example, if we're asking for commercial rent reforms and the MPP is hearing pushback from landlords at the same time, it's helpful for us to ask what the pushback is so that we can reflect on it, address it, and move towards a compromise. So the goal of our meetings on Lobby Day are pretty simple. We want to first introduce ourselves as businesses who are providing good jobs. So essentially getting them to know who the BWA is. We also want to start relationships with MPPs on the basis of being accomplished business owners with interesting perspectives. And we want the MPPs to leave the conversation thinking that we're businesses who are worth listening to, and not just because we agree with everything they say. So basically, we want to leave with, an open door to a future meeting. We probably aren't going to change anyone's mind in one conversation, but we can become interesting people that they would want to listen to again. So we want to think about how we'll achieve this and how we'll get closer to those goals. So a really effective approach is to tell a story. So you're going to tell your story, what your business is, how you started it, and how long you've been in business. We want you to talk about your business model and what makes you successful, including your employment practices and your company culture. And we want to try to have a good conversation with the MPPs based on how you offer great local jobs and what you contribute to your community. The aim is to have them see you as a credible business voice, and someone who they'd speak to again or consider visiting your workplace to take pictures, to connect with, and to connect with the local business community.
So let's get into more of the details. What actually happens at a meeting with an MPP? Well, the first thing that happens are introductions. The MPP might attend with their staff person, and they'll talk about their roles, and everyone on our side can introduce themselves. Next, we'll talk about what the issue is. For us, we're there because we want to talk about the importance of fostering businesses that create good jobs in local economies. The MPP will then ask, what would you like me to do about it? And we get to make a request. Here, we're going to be asking if we can build relationships and open the lines of communication for policy issues, and also to see if the MPP side can listen to what's important to us. We'd love to share what's on our mind these days as businesses who create good jobs. The MPP then can respond to that request. It might be a commitment to help you or to listen, a commitment to start a conversation, or maybe come out to visit your business. They also might not want to take any action right now, and you can always feel free to ask why not and make alternative suggestions. To wrap up the meeting, essentially we state what the next steps are, like a follow-up email or fax that supports some of the stories you told, or penciling in a visit to your business. And then we thank the MPP and their staff for their time and hopefully take a photo. So we have a PDF document that will help you prepare. And I'm going to run through some of these examples with Jess. Jess runs Bread by Us, which is a bakery and espresso bar in Hintonburg, Ottawa. And so she's going to be answering some of the prompt questions based on her experience with Bread by Us. So for the first prompt, Jess, can you take a look at the MPP list that we're inviting for meetings? Are there any MPPs from your riding or any MPPs that are working on files that you're particularly concerned about? Anyone who you're specifically interested in meeting?
Yeah, so at the time that we're recording this, we haven't yet confirmed all of our MPP meetings. So I'll base my answers off of our list of hopefuls. I would love the opportunity to meet with an MPP who has a lot of influence on the issues that the BWA cares about, and who I think would benefit from hearing a business perspective other than the ones they probably hear all the time. So my first pick would be Monty McNaughton, who is a conservative MPP and the current Minister of Labor. I would also like the opportunity to connect with Merritt Stiles, who was just named the new NDP leader. As the opposition party and as someone whose party has been fighting for some of the same things we are, I think it would be beneficial for us to make that introduction.
As we stated in the email, we're attempting to schedule meetings with MPPs from all of the main political parties. Okay, let's talk about how we can prepare. So here we have a few prompts that we're going to run through with Jess and speak to them from the Bread by Us. You can watch and pause the video and do your preparatory work alongside, or just watch it all and then later on have a think as we approach lobby day. Okay, so Jess, let's talk about introductions and bringing up the issue that's important to us. Imagine that we're meeting with the MPP and it's your turn to introduce yourself. This is your chance to talk about your motivations for creating good jobs and how you do it in your business. Just as a kind of aside, you might find it easier to do this as you're preparing to tell a personal story. For example, your own life experience that led you to starting a business with an ethical company culture. Stories are more relatable than facts, and they're more convincing and memorable. You also might feel more comfortable speaking from your own experience than memorizing some facts. Feel free to go into detail about how you create good jobs. Talk about your unique business case, what makes you successful, and what sets you apart from other businesses. So let's say we're meeting with Merritt Stiles, Jess. It's your chance to talk about your motivations for creating a business that creates good jobs and how you do it.
All right. So in 2012, I was working at a fine dining restaurant and I saw my kitchen colleague suddenly leave the line. It wasn't unusual for a cook to leave in the middle of service for a quick cigarette or a washroom break, but I could tell that this was different. When he returned to the kitchen, his face was pale and I could tell that he wasn't okay. So I asked him what was going on. And he told me that he'd been vomiting throughout his shift. We continued working side by side until the end of the night. And I could only hope that the rest of the kitchen crew and our customers would make it out without getting sick themselves. Nothing about this incident was unusual. It was pretty common for all of the workplaces that I worked in before I opened my own shop. And anyone working in food services has similar stories to tell. A lack of paid sick days and access to that kind of leave makes working while sick the norm in our industry. So when I decided to open my bakery in 2013, I had the goal to challenge the status quo. Fast forward to 2020, by the time COVID hit, my bakery was in its 7th year and I had grown to 12 employees. And it quickly became clear that this event was going to affect our industry in a big way. Sure enough, the pandemic was a tipping point for workers, and they left the industry in droves for safer jobs and better conditions. Many of them realized that their health was more important than this low-paying job that they had. I'm happy to say that this exodus didn't affect my team, though. And in fact, I was struck by the dedication that my team demonstrated throughout these last 3 years. I believe I owe much of the success of my business to the mutual care that flows between me and my employees. So yeah, that is, I think, the story that I want to share at Lobby Day.
I think that's great. And it makes me feel like I know a bit about you and about your history. And also you illustrated the fact that you have paid sick days and that offering this builds trust and is a reason why you survived. So I think that's a great way to kind of illustrate how you go about creating good jobs and why you do it and why it serves you.
Mhm.
So at Lobby Day, we have an opportunity to bring some supportive materials if we want. These are things like they could be fact sheets or newspaper articles, policy backgrounders, maybe photographs of awards that you've won for how you've contributed to the community. Basically things that you can add to illustrate your stories and give you confidence that you've got your facts straight or confident that you're really stressing the important things you want to get across. Other ideas are you could write a letter to the MPP stating the issue, your experience with creating good jobs, your concerns, and an invitation to visit your store or get back to you and have a phone call. Sometimes the materials that we leave behind won't be used during the meeting, but they might be referred to after, particularly by staffers. And sometimes they're just there to help you feel ready as well. Jess, on Lobby Day, is there anything that you want to bring that will help you illustrate your story and your experience with Bread by Us or offering good employment?
Yeah, I think I'll keep this like pretty simple for me. The story I just shared with you was taken from a recent article that I published in Ottawa Magazine, where I tell that story and then I outline the case for paid sick days in the food service industry and kind of tie it to our current challenges with labor shortages. And I just think I'll bring a few copies of that with me and leave it to the MPPs that I meet with. And it'll also help me in case I stray from my story a bit, and it can help me stay on track.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's also a way, I think, to illustrate how current and topical these issues are. Like if they're being picked up in a mainstream magazine, like they're important issues to be paid attention to, and not just from a political angle. So I think that's great. Okay, so then let's talk about the so what at the meeting. You know, here's where we kind of tell the MPPs like why we want to meet with you and what is it that's really important that we want to share. So as we mentioned, our specific request for Lobby Day is to invite MPPs to get to know the different kinds of businesses that are contributing to the community and listen to the issues that concern us today. So us as ethical employers are really bringing a new perspective to the business conversation, and MPPs are quite used to listening to chambers of commerce and the CFIB and those types of groups that are often really vocal about reducing red tape and reducing costs. And here we're a group of business owners who invest in our workforce and see good results. So, you know, we're there just trying to invite them and ask them to listen to this new perspective and also listen to what us as a group with these kinds of businesses have on our mind. For example, you might be worried about SEBA loans. Maybe you have concerns about rent or you're worried about inflation. These are topics that are top of mind for our group of business owners, and we want to kind of open MPP's eyes to these topics. Just from the Bred by Us perspective, is there anything that's on your mind, like maybe a significant concern about some sort of business policy or the business environment that you want to share with the MPPs?
Definitely. So I think because we want these meetings to be pretty tight and to have the message come through clearly, I was trying to think of like the one thing that I really want to get across. So I would really like to try to find a way to bring up the fact that businesses like mine and like yours, the delegates, who are contributing so much to their communities and who are creating good jobs, are struggling to thrive really because the inequities that are built into our commercial leasing system. So I think it would be a very effective approach to start with, like, look at who we are as these businesses, look at how well we're caring for our communities, for our staff. Like, surely you want a business like ours to succeed and to thrive. So yeah, I want to convey the fact that if governments actually want to support small businesses like ours, we need more opportunities for stable long-term leases in order to plan for the future and actually invest in our companies. So I want each MPP who I meet with to know that, one, I care deeply about creating good jobs and the success of my business depends on upholding that principle. And two, the biggest long-term challenges I face are a direct result of the power imbalance between commercial tenants and our landlords. And I want to make sure that they start to understand this specific problem from our point of view.
Yeah, thanks. There's so much in there that I think it could be the start of some really interesting conversations. And that kind of takes us into the next section. So we're going to be sharing some tips and tricks about how you can prepare for conversations that might be tense or might have some disagreement. I'm definitely not saying that the conversations are going to be difficult, but what I mean to say is we may be speaking to MPPs who have different ideologies and have different perspectives. And so if you start to feel a little bit tense or awkward, you can think about how you might want to prepare for this. So we have a few phrases that you might use and techniques that can help you feel ready. Before we get into that, I want to share just a few tips that perhaps can help boost your confidence going into the meeting. What's helpful for me to remember is that it's the MPP's job to meet with you as a constituent. Like, they have to make time to listen to you, and they are interested in listening to stories that make their priorities or desires possible. So with all of the parties that we're going to meet with, the MPPs are certainly concerned with responding to the labor crisis, with creating good jobs, and with fostering a good economy. And we know that the PCs are interested in reducing red tape as well, and some of the and the administrative burden for businesses. So those are points that we might be able to find some commonality around. The other thing is that you're an expert in your own business. You can always answer a question from the point of view of your own work in your business and your own life story. Anecdotes rather than facts are really memorable, and often storytelling can really help get a point across. So the first conversation technique that we'll talk about, I want to go this way, is pivoting. So pivoting is when you move from a topic that you don't want to speak about to a topic that you do want to speak about. For example, we might be in a meeting about commercial rent, and the MPP starts speaking about how many landlords are having trouble meeting rising costs. If you don't know the answer, or it might take you off topic, you could use a few phrases. For example, I don't know, but I'll get back to you on that. What I think is more interesting or relevant, though, is, and then you can get into the fact that you as a business owner are having trouble with your rent. Or you might use the phrase, I don't know about X, I don't know about landlords, but what I do know is that my rent, or whatever topic, is a bigger issue than for me. And then you can go into further detail. So you've basically avoided having to answer something that you don't want to talk about and turn it onto a topic that you do want to talk about. And there isn't any necessarily right topic. You can just pivot it to whatever it is that you want to speak to. So that's a helpful one.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great technique when something is kind of going in a direction that you don't want it to. If you get into a situation where you can sense like the mood of the room shifting or the mood internally shifting because somebody has said something that feels just very untrue for you, or you start realizing that you're just, there's a lot of distance between you and the MPP ideologically. I have some insights, I guess, into like what has helped me and how I've dealt with situations like that. So I try to keep in mind that a win, like what would be a win for us in a closed door meeting, is really just to be heard. So to have the MPP really fully like understand your point of view and to shift their perspective, even if it's a slight shift. And then also we want to make sure we're keeping the door open. So in a public forum, such as a debate, winning might mean something very different. So it might mean sort of crushing the other side's arguments, which is not really what is going to be effective in this setting, because our goal is to move closer to each other. Of course, without like diluting our fundamental beliefs and values and goals. But it is to be able to get that person across the room, across the aisle from us, to kind of come closer to our perspective. So it is important for us to keep track a bit of the mood of the room and dial back our approach a bit if there appears to be an escalation. So pushing back, I think, and challenging somebody's point of view is okay, but we want to just keep in mind that escalation is not likely to move us any closer to our goals. So some examples of how you might be able to shift a tense conversation. I have like a few phrases and techniques that I've used in situations that I think can help. So something like, I think we can all agree that we're concerned about workers leaving our industry. So even if you're noticing a disagreement between you and the person across from you, bring it back to a shared sense of having a common goal. So I think we can all agree is a good way of doing that. Or we're all on the same page that labor shortages are posing a threat to this industry. Or I think we can acknowledge that small businesses are the driver of Ontario's economy and we all want small businesses to flourish. So bringing it back to something that we can all agree on is a way of reminding the other person that we're on the same team. I can see that maybe we aren't in full disagreement, but can we find some common ground? That could be another way of reaching across the aisle. I can see that we view these issues a bit differently, but it sounds like we care about similar things. Is there a middle ground that we could work towards? Another way that you can kind of diffuse a situation that might be getting a little bit heated is to ask somebody a curious question. So I find that when somebody says something that I just feel like inside that I fundamentally disagree with, I try to probe them a little bit further and try to, I guess, demonstrate that I'm curious to understand their point of view. So, for example, if an MPP says regulation is bad for business, this is something that I've heard more than once. Instead of saying, no, it's not, you can say, can you explain why you see it that way? And I think that's an important approach to take, because it gives you time to slow the conversation down and to pause. And I think slowing the conversation down tends to kind of keep things at like a reasonable level. It gives you time to collect your thoughts. It gives time for them to maybe even reveal their own internal contradictions, or it could give them the sense that maybe they're not like, maybe they don't necessarily like hold these beliefs, super strongly. It could give them a sense of I don't know, it could throw them also off their game a little bit, which is, not to be like a meanie, but I think that like it's important to challenge people, but with curiosity, because that's how we start to shift people's point of view.
Yeah, you're definitely not a meanie. Okay, so let's practice then. Are there any ways of de-escalating a tense situation that you think might work for you? For example, say I'm Marit Stiles, and I might say, oh, I've heard about, okay, well, it wouldn't really be a Marit Stiles thing to say, but maybe I'm a PC MPP, and I say, look, Jess, that's really interesting, but I've heard from various business groups that small businesses are really squeezed for cost right now. They definitely don't want any increases in cost. So it's great that you're paying good wages, but it's not a business model that works for everyone. What would you say to that?
So I think first off, it's important to acknowledge that what you are saying is true. So I definitely sympathize with that point of view because I too feel squeezed. And by demonstrating that like I agree with you, it sort of shows that I'm willing to acknowledge that what that person is saying is real on some level. So I'm going to start by saying I can definitely sympathize with that because I feel it as well. I think that's true for anyone in a traditionally more thin margin industry like food service, like the one that I'm in. The reality, though, is that the model of squeezing more out of workers and paying them unlivable wages is not a sustainable approach. And it's not sustainable even for businesses, because what we're seeing now with labor shortages is that people can't afford to enter into our industries and maintain any reasonable quality of life. So we have to rethink our approach to labor costs. And I'm certainly not trying to imply that it's a simple solution, but only that we have to start thinking about this problem differently.
That's so diplomatic. I love it. I
Well,
just
we're
think
trying. This wasn't my first draft, which is why
yeah.
I think it's important that we think about these things ahead of time, because my impulse is not to say, look, what you're saying is valid, but taking a moment and validating what the person is saying goes a long way in creating that relationship. And I've pushed back on what you said, and hopefully shifted your perspective a little bit. And so I've pushed back, but I haven't shut you down. And I think that's the balance that we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the way that you concluded it with saying, like, actually, it's about rethinking this and acknowledging the complexity in this issue
Mm-hmm.
is a reasonable shift. And it's something that I could easily get on board with, despite any sort of ideological differences.
Yeah.
You're not asking someone to see it from a different ideology. It's just recognizing that this is a hard issue.
Yeah.
So
which I think is like a
great.
reasonable like goal in these meetings, is to get someone to acknowledge that like maybe there's just like a new way we should be looking at this.
Yeah, totally. That's great. Okay, so we've had our conversations. We've talked about who we are as businesses, what issues we're concerned about, and now we want to do a follow-up. So an email thank you formally is really important. The BWA staff is going to take charge of that. So we'll send formal follow-ups on behalf of the whole group. And then you're also welcome to send a follow-up with any sort of points that you mentioned that you wanted to follow up on, or anything that you spoke about in the meeting that you want to reiterate. So, for example, you might send a little personal anecdote that reinforces your concerns, or supply some data points that you mentioned in the meeting. For example, how many businesses in your community are closing down or having to relocate. Also, if there were any next steps that you committed to, like sending a media story that featured your business, etc. Just make sure that you complete these steps in the next 1 to 2 days while the meeting is fresh in the MPPs and their staff mind. The more that you wait, the greater the chance of inaction by the MPP's office. You might also want to make notes on how your next meeting could be better and what really worked for this meeting to be a success. And then you can also make sure that you celebrate the fact that you participated in civic life and that you stood up for your values. That's really amazing. And it's a leadership step that is really important in our communities. And it takes a lot of courage sometimes to take.
Yeah, so I think next up, we wanted to just give people the opportunity to interact as a group with one another before we meet on lobby day. And so we are going to be sharing a Slack channel where we would invite you to share any experiences that you've had meeting with elected officials before. We want to hear about what made that meeting successful, or whether there's anything you would do differently next time. And, you know, if you haven't had any experience meeting with elected officials, I'm sure there have been some meetings that you've had that feel like a little bit more high stakes, that you could probably translate some of your experiences to this one. So feel free to share your experiences in the Slack channel. They're helpful for people who haven't met with MPPs before, and they can also spark discussion on setting the stage for a successful meeting.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see kind of what is shared there. The next thing we want to talk about is any sort of fears, discomfort, anger, apprehension, feelings that are coming up for you as you listen to this training, or concerns about how the meeting might go, or concerns about you in relation to lobby day. If you're dealing with any sort of discomfort or like feelings, Jess has a really cool method that helps her work through these sorts of feelings. So just maybe I'll let you explain the steps and then offer your own experience from the Bred by Us perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, I'm a pretty anxious person. I have to work through a lot of my own apprehension to like step into meetings like this, to voice my beliefs, my opinions, to public speak. All of that doesn't come very naturally to me. And so I first think it's like important to acknowledge and like name what's going on. So for me, that kind of manifests as like my body is just kind of like vibrates on another frequency. I get like cold hands, I get dry mouth. I'm sure a lot of people can like relate to this when they're doing high stakes things. And if I reflect on that for a moment, I realize that I like try to ask myself why, like what's going on. And I think for me, it's because it feels like a lot is at stake and that I'm afraid I won't do justice to the issue. I congratulate you if you don't have these concerns or fears, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that for some of us, this does bring on some like fears. And yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself because I feel like I'm representing businesses, I'm representing my team, I'm representing people who don't have a voice, and so, or whose voice is not like taken as seriously as mine. So I put a lot of pressure on myself. But then I like to take a step even back further, one step, and say that like, I want to push back on that impulse that I have to A, put so much pressure on myself, and B, being self-critical even before the event. And if I dig deeper, I realize that I just care a lot about this issue and these issues that we're bringing up. And I'm willing to step outside my comfort zone and fight for something I believe in. And ultimately, that's something that I think is worth being proud of and is like worth celebrating. And I hope that you can all think about that and sort of pat yourselves on the back as well for taking a step outside your comfort zone and going into meetings like this. So, yeah. think it helps just to like stop and reflect on what it is that we're feeling going into these meetings, because it can get us into like a much better headspace. And I think for meetings like this, it's important to go in with like a really good, confident headspace.
Hooray. And with that, we've done our training.
Yay!
So we hope, Jess, I hope you feel prepared.
Nervous but ready.
Yeah, that's a good state to be in. So we hope this training has helped you feel prepared or perhaps nervous but ready for a meeting with the MPPs. Yeah, make sure that you take the time to complete the prompts. We found that we had to do a lot more thinking than we expected, and take more time to carefully think out what it is that you want to say. Sometimes you might think you have an idea clear in your mind, but when you try and voice it and say it out loud, it will go on for 10 minutes or you might miss the important point. So it's helpful to give yourself time to write it out. Again, the most important stuff that we covered is in the PDF document. So just you can review that as many times as you want before Lobby Day. And we just want to congratulate you on the fact that you want to come to Lobby Day and join us and meet with MPPs. It's really exciting. We really appreciate your leadership, and we hope that it's a day that you enjoy. And remember, Jess and I will both be there. So we'll see you there, and you can approach us with questions about the training or anything you want in advance. Just send us an email. And you can reach out to us. You must have our emails by now. You can also find us on social media or on our website. But that's it. So thanks so much for participating, and we'll see you at Lobby Day. Bye.
Bye.